Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter to you. We're excited today to have a fixture of leadership in the Gem State, the current CEO and president of the Boise Metro Chamber, none other than Bobbi-Jo Meuleman. Bobbi-Jo, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
We're excited today to draw from a wealth of your knowledge. You've got a lot of experience. You've got this somewhat new role with the chamber we'll get into. But before we dig into chamber and economic development and all that fun stuff, I think it would be important to kind of cover your origin story here. Help us understand how you went from working in Washington, D.C. for a Montana congressman to ending up working for two governors of Idaho and Boise.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun story to talk about. I was born and raised in Montana, and when I was a junior in college, I went to the University of Montana in Missoula. My major was political science, not because, I thought that I would have a career in politics. I simply liked government and history, so thought, hey, why not? When I was a junior in college, I did an internship in Washington, D.C. with Senator Conrad Burns. And I can tell you it was probably a very pivotal point in my life, a decision I made that would impact me for the rest of my life that I had no idea I was making at the time. Went back to DC, absolutely loved it, fell in love with the office, just loved working out there. It's a great, fun environment. Had 1 year of college left, came back, graduated, and had a job with them. I graduated on Saturday. On Monday, my mom and dad and I had my Chevy Silverado packed up, and we drove from Browning, Montana to Washington, D.C., which, to give you a sense of where Browning, Montana is, it took us 8 hours just to get out of Montana because we went from one part of the state to the other. But moved to Washington, D.C., and worked for Conrad Burns for a few years, and then he lost re-election to John Tester. At that time, I went to work for Congressman Denny Reberg from Montana. When I was working for Senator Burns, I met my husband. We started dating. He was working for Senator Craig, and we got engaged. My husband got a job back out here in Boise. He's born and raised. And as politics is, or just life in general, it's a lot of relationships who you know. The congressman I was working for was very good friends with Governor Butch Otter because they served in Congress together. The congressman made a call and said, hey, there's this Montana girl moving to Idaho, and if you got a job or know something, she'd be, gave me a gloating recommendation. And happened to be that Governor Otter had a job opening for the same job I was doing for the congressman, which was a scheduler. And I went and interviewed with him, and the rest is kind of history.
Wow. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think one of them that jumps out is this is very topical because your old boss that lost re-election to Senator Tester, at time of recording right now, that is a neck and neck race that could determine who controls the Senate, the Republicans and the Democrats.
Isn't it funny? I think about that. I was watching the news the other day, and they did a big segment on it about the she-he Tester race. And it's really fascinating to me to think about, because that was a really close race and no one thought Tester would win, and he did, and it was a huge upset. And now that race could determine, it's a really big race. It's funny, Conrad Burns, I got a signed picture of his. It's a United States Capitol, and it's signed by him. It's actually in my office here. If I knew how to work this computer, I'd show you. But when I was working for Governor Little, we actually, Senator Tester's nephew was an intern. And I called him in and I said, do you see that picture? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, you know who that guy is? And he's like, I think so. And I was like, it's the guy that beat my boss. And he was terrified. He now works for Senator Risch, and we laugh about it a lot about that story. But yeah, it's kind of weird to think that now that is a really pivotal race that could really determine a lot of things.
Wow. And what a small world in politics.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So from then Congressman Butch Otter's office, you then transitioned when he won the governorship to your first stint in, executive office.
Well, he was, when I moved to Idaho, he was a governor at that point. He was in his first term as governor.
Okay, so it was a newly elected Governor
Yeah.
Otter, and you joined that staff. Great.
Yep.
So you worked for Governor Otter, and you obviously have worked for our current governor, Governor Brad Little. Talk
Yep.
to us about what different experiences those were, knowing that many of our listeners have great adoration for both men, both very ag-focused, business-friendly, but they are different, and they took different approaches.
Yeah, they were both really wonderful. People often ask me about, my trajectory and my success in politics. And I mean, I can single-handedly say if it were not for those two men, I would not be where I am today. They, being elevated and supported by governors is a pretty cool thing. And I will forever be grateful for them. They are wonderful and are really, I mean, every success has people behind you lifting you up, and those two men were it for sure. It's really funny. They're both similar but different in their ways. Governor Otter, he's a guy that he's just so personable, right? He'd go in, never read a memo, right? Go in, it could be he's going to go talk to a bunch of educators, and he'd start talking about the Antiquities Act and maybe not even touch on education, and everyone would love it, right? They'd be raving and roaring because he was just so personable, right? And then Governor Little is, he is just so smart and such a policy guy, right? He knows the details of everything, which is really fun because he is engaged in every level. And so very, detail oriented, data oriented, reads everything. I remember once I did nuclear stuff for him, and there was a big nuclear report that came out with the Line Commission, and he asked me, he's like, did you read this? I was like, no, because I knew you would. And then you tell me about it. So, but both very, when we would go to Republican governor events in other states, everyone they would rave about how personable and how kind and how accessible and down to earth our governors are. And I think that's something that's really special. And so they're very similar in that way, right? That they're just genuine people and they really do care. Have such a great understanding of the culture and the history and the roots of this state. It's really unique, just the knowledge that they have, and I think we're really lucky to have had and have governors that operate that way.
I completely agree. And I'm going to shift the spotlight a little away from them and a little more on you at the moment, because you're a prime example of meritocracy in Idaho, of somebody who started a position and just, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you have a reputation as somebody who does her homework, who works really hard, who manages relationships really well, and cares about the people she works with. And you found yourself in really significant positions of influence in Idaho and having the governor's ears. For those who are listening, walk us through the approach of maybe where you credit growth in public service in your approach.
Interesting, and it was my husband, and it was when I took this role. And one of the things I had to do when I first took this role was there was an event where people got to learn about me, and I don't really like talking about myself. And my husband said to me, you have an interesting story to tell where you started out as a scheduler, right? I started out as a solely administrative job and have worked my way up through the different ranks. And, I don't really know how to credit that except from, hard work, right? You have to be responsive. You have to work hard. I think there's real value in relationships and knowing people. And I got to know that at an early age. And I think because I was a scheduler, I think that really started cultivating the importance of that. Being in that role, you are the face, the front entrance to these elected officials. And with that, you get to know people and you get to know their story, and you get to know if it's a good thing for your boss to do or maybe not a good thing for your boss to do. And through that, you just build these relationships, and you really start to see the power of knowing people and how that just can make things to get done better. I think there's nothing more rewarding when you can take an issue and bring people from all different sides and views, work together. Sometimes it's painful and it's torture, but there is no better feeling when you work together towards something and you achieve something. And that gets done through relationships. And So I think that has just been one thing that my career I've continued to do is really understand the importance of those relationships, foster those relationships, and it takes time. It takes time, but I've always made time for it, right? And I've really been rewarded for that because by doing that, people get to know you, people see your quality, people know what you're capable of, people trust you. And it really has been what has led me to every kind of advancement that I've had in my career. I can pinpoint, I think it's because of relationships that have been developed.
Yeah, there's definitely a lesson there in both personal and professional development. Uh, so does that mean that the learning curve when you went from, public service and government to your current role at the Boise Metro Chamber, was the learning curve shrunk because of all these experiences and relationships you had?
I would say honestly, the biggest learning curve for me is when I moved from DC, from federal government, and went into state government. That was a big shift. The expectation is much different on a state level. The expectation for a governor is much different than on a federal level because you're closer to the people. And there was a huge learning curve. Like I remember it was my first day, and I think I started in November. And the chief of staff at the time, Jason Kreisbeck, came into me and he said, "Hey, I needed to get a meeting with the governor and all the constitutional officers." And I was like, "Yeah, on it." I had to Google. I didn't even know what a constitutional officer was. I'm like, "What is he talking about?" Right? Who are these people? And so it's much closer, and there's a big learning curve, right? Of getting to know, obviously you have to learn how the governor's office works, but how all the agencies work, how the legislative process is, the judicial process. I mean, it's just all the way down to like city, county, tribal. I mean, you're interacting with so many different levels that that was, I would say, a learning curve from that perspective. I will tell you, going into this job, I felt very fortunate having the relationships that I had. I know a lot of people, right? And so having that has been really helpful. Also, my time at the Department of Commerce really, I think, set me up pretty well for this job, just in the sense of kind of the economics of it and, the business component of it has been really helpful. But there has been a learning curve for sure too. I've never worked in an association world, so I've had to learn a lot about membership and a lot about sales. We have leadership programs, a lot of those things. So there has definitely been a learning curve, but I do think my experiences in working in the state for as long as I did and just knowing a lot of people, knowing how a lot of things work and operate, gave me a little bit of an advantage in this job, I think.
Yeah, many in the business community heavily rely on local chambers, but many in the general populace probably aren't familiar. For me, for example, I spent way too long thinking that the Bank of Commerce and Chamber of Commerce were the same thing. So for those who are as ignorant as I am, can you give us a 101 on chambers, how they work and why they operate?
Yeah. So, chambers are really their business associations, right? They're a place where businesses come together and they come together for different reasons, but chambers are facilitators of conversations, of ideas. They are a place where you come to be community advocates. They're a place where you can get members together to talk about issues that matter to the business community. They're a place where you can foster future leaders. I think we do a lot of connecting, a lot of advocacy, a lot of partnering. It's really an association where you can come together and belong, and we have a little bit of something for everyone. And, at the Boise Metro Chamber, we have a pretty big membership base, and, we have membership from very big businesses to very small businesses. We have businesses that are in retail. We have businesses that are in finance. We have businesses that are in healthcare, manufacturing, so on and so forth. And they all join a chamber, some of them for different reasons, but a lot of it is to be part of something. And that has been the coolest thing, I think, for me in this job, is especially in the metro area, is the generosity of our business community and how much they give back. I mean, they really are the factor that we are doing so well in the Treasure Valley is because of that generosity. I'm kind of embarrassed that I wasn't aware of how generous they were and all of the wonderful things that they do. And I think that's one of the coolest things and things I've really enjoyed the most about this job is really getting to have more of a role in the community and being part of keeping the community the place we all like to live, work, play, and where people like to come visit.
Yeah. Can you highlight some of those, maybe it's just some odd examples of where you've seen local businesses show this sense of generosity?
Well, I mean, you see it firsthand, right? For a chamber, right? We're membership due based, we're events based, and they always show up, right? They're always there supporting us at the different entities of things that we've done. I've gotten to really get to know a lot more about our nonprofit community in the Treasure Valley and in Idaho this past year. And, all of them have certain events or fundraising levels that they do, and they all get success because they have great partners from our business community. Another example is in Idaho, I can think of, in the Treasure Valley, I can think of 5 or 6 capital campaigns with some nonprofits right off the top of my head. They're all being successful. And these are big projects, and they're all being successful because of that business support, that, investment that their business community is making. It's really eye-opening, and it's really cool, and it makes you realize that everything's kind of bigger than us, right? And one thing that's been kind of something I've thought a lot more about is, okay, now what is I need to be giving back, right? How can we give back? How can I individually, and how can the chamber give back? And so we're coming up with ways of how we can highlight the nonprofit sectors and things like that to give back like our partners do.
And I'm so glad you brought this up, because you can't really go to a local school or the symphony or a sports event without seeing businesses who are willing to put their name on things, who are willing to try to make the community better. But it's not all one-sided. They need something back, and it's not just our patronage, but as a voice for business, they also need government to work in a certain way. In what ways have you decided that it's important for Idaho to better foster the business community?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest things. It's one of the things I'm the most excited about in this job, because it's it's where I came from, and that's government, that's advocacy, right? And how can we be the voice? We get to be the voice for business, and so how can we be better at that and advocate better for them? And I think a lot of it is how do we ensure we're the voice for all of our members, right? And so one of the things we're really trying to do is we have committees and councils broken up: education, transportation, all the different big issues, making sure that we're listening to the members that participate in that, so we know the challenges that business is facing right now. And so that's the first thing, right? You need to know what those challenges are for your membership. Some of the things we're dealing with here in the metro area is, transportation and homelessness and things like that on a community level. And so really being engaged and understanding and being at the table of those conversations. Someone said to me, what do you want to see the chamber in a year? What's success for you? And really, obviously, it's membership. We need to maintain membership and continue to grow. But I also want the Boise Chamber to be someone that everyone's like, they need to be at the table for these discussions, right? Like, we need to be part of the conversation. And so it's understanding our members' needs. It is maintaining relationship with government officials from all levels, from state, local, and federal, having those relationships. So when there are those issues that our members are having, we have the opportunity to sit down and have those conversations. And then just making sure we're present, right? We got to make sure we're present when these conversations are going on, and partnering. I'm a huge advocate for partnerships. And that's one thing I've really tried to do this past year, is get out to our other associations, members, folks like us, and say, hey, let's partner. How can we work together? Because I really think we're better together, and, high tide floats all boats, or whatever that saying is. I truly believe that. So it's kind of there's a lot of things we have to do, but it is something for me that it's a priority. And I think it's a real benefit for being part of a chamber is having a strong voice.
Yeah. And you referenced earlier the learning curve between the expectations of working in Washington, D.C. and then at a state level. And I'll fill in the gap that I'm guessing the reference is the expectation in D.C. if something doesn't move, gridlock is, kind of it's the normality, right? It is. Whereas in Idaho, especially in Idaho, the expectation is that we will have a balanced budget, that the governor will be able to step up and help with whether it's infrastructure needs or great programs like launch or cutting red tape and all the things that you were involved with. It's kind of the same in your role now in that businesses are less concerned about the partisanship, but the expectation is that they need solutions to infrastructure or workforce, things like that. Do you find yourself kind of pulled between the needs of the businesses and then a willing and welcoming government to help solve them?
I think so far we've been successful, right? A good example of one of the things that we have been huge advocates for is Idaho Launch. Continue to be advocates for Idaho Launch. I think from the business sector, obviously workforce and the talent is you need the people. Without the people, we're not successful. And that has been a successful program. Again, I think it goes back to having those relationships, and you have to be able to have conversations, and you have to know that maybe sometimes you're not going to get exactly what you want, but hopefully you can meet in the middle. And so right now, I think we've felt pretty good, right? As there's been things that we've advocated for, and I think we're going to continue with that approach, right? Is how can we help move the process forward? How can we engage our members and the business community to help move things forward? How can we, if there's things we don't agree with, how can we be at the table to say, okay, this is why this is a problem for the business community? How can we work together to try to, come to solutions? And I know that doesn't always happen, right? And I think we've been fortunate, in the past year that, some of the things we really cared about worked out in our favor. And, we'll see as we're going into the next legislative session of things that we'll be watching and following. But it is all just, it's kind of an approach of how you take it, and just making sure we can be part of the conversation is something that I know we're going to really work hard on.
Yeah, you mentioned the upcoming legislative session. I know one of your goals in the vision as you kind of took the lead at the Metro Chamber was to have a larger presence in the State House. Are there certain, and I know that that's largely due to, as you referenced, the importance of relationships. It's not there to twist arms. It's there to keep those relationships alive and well. But are there certain legislative issues that you already know that the chamber's going to want to have a voice on?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to Idaho Launch. Idaho Launch will be one that we continue to advocate for to ensure, it continues to get funded. That's a program that the business community just really supports. So we always watch those. Urban renewal, there's typically always an urban renewal bill, and those give us some concern. We like watching, we support tax cuts, right? Those benefit our businesses. Things related to transportation, education, I think will be a big topic this year. And, part of it is being present is it's making sure you're paying attention, but you hear things by that collaboration, by talking to people, you gain information so you can better relay that information to your members about what's going on and try to have a plan. We have a policy committee that meets once a week during the session, and they're a very active committee. So we're excited, now that I've got a year under my belt and, feeling settled, and I'm really ready for this session because I think it's going to be fun. And I've got a great team here that is ready to kind of roll up their sleeves and be part of it. But a lot of it too is to be present as you gain so much information because you hear things from people, right? It's, you pass in the hall or you see someone, or sometimes it's just giving, you're like, oh, what's that person doing here, right? And so I think just being around and present, it's really important, and it'll allow us to make sure we know exactly what's going on so we can relay that to our members.
Yeah. For those listening who, whether they live in the Treasure Valley or other parts of Idaho, who have suddenly gotten excited about the idea of their local chambers, what advice would you give for anybody who now wants to participate, business owner or not?
Yeah, I would say, reach out to your local chamber and just see what they can offer you. Have that conversation. It never hurts to ask and explore things. I think one thing too I want to highlight is I go back to partnerships, and working closely with my Treasure Valley chambers is a priority of mine. The chambers of Boise, Nampa, Meridian, and Caldwell yesterday, as I'm sure October 16th, everyone knew, was National Support Your Local Chamber of Commerce Day. And so we did kind of a progressive series of events all day, which was really fun. And I'm excited about that partnership, right? As anyone who lives here knows, the Metro, we're becoming just one, right? And again, working together, we're just better together. And so I'm excited about those partnerships. But yeah, if you're interested or kind of curious, what a chamber could do for you, reach out, go to an event, go sit down, and you might walk away, say, maybe that's not for me, but it might be an opportunity that you want to explore.
I love that. Great advice. So we've got a long list of things that next time you come on the podcast, when you have the time, we would love to dive into. But we know how busy you are. When we wrap up, we want to make sure that there's a tradition here on the podcast we do with our guests for their first time, where we put them on the spot and we quiz them on one book they've read in their life that they would recommend to anybody out there. So is there a book, Bobbi-Jo, that you think would be life-changing for any of us?
Oh my goodness, a book that would be life-changing.
No pressure.
Do you have any other questions that you ask? I don't know if any of the books that I've read have been life-changing.
I think your old partner in crime, Alex Adams, we always reference how,
that's not fair. You can't compare the book question to me and Alex.
Alex, not only did he have a lot, but they all sounded very boring. I'm sure there's a better way to word that. I think he referenced putting his daughter to sleep with the regulation books he would read her at night.
He gave me a book for my birthday one year, and I was like, huge. I don't even know. And he was like, I know. I was like, okay.
So I take it you haven't read that birthday present yet.
No, I haven't. There is, I will tell you, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but when I took this job, there was a friend of mine in North Idaho who was a CEO of a hospital at the time, and he sent me a book. And in the note, it was, it's very lonely at the top. And it was a book kind of about, right, like when you're the leader of an organization, it can be lonely. And, there's a lot of decisions and things you have to do. And so I read that book, and it was actually very helpful. And I've used some of those concepts throughout the year. And it was good, I think, to prepare me for what I was going into, but I can't for the life of me remember what it was called. But it was good.
It'll come to you the second we stop recording. That's kind of how it works. But yes, that does sound like a very valuable book. Well, there is one other question that we do ask that's a little easier and more topical, because we're all about supporting local businesses. So is there, as you've traveled around the state, a hole-in-the-wall restaurant that you would advise, whether it's in the Boise metro area or somewhere else, that everybody, if they're right there, they probably should stop and try?
I will tell you, in all of my travels, it's not so much a restaurant, it's just the experience. I think everyone in Idaho needs to go to Wallace, Idaho, the center of the universe. That is what I will say on that. Lovely restaurants, lovely amenities, but Wallace is a place that I think everyone should see if you live in Idaho.
Wow. We've had a lot of people sidestep that question. We've never had anybody give us a whole city, though. So well done, Bobbi-Jo. I love that. Okay, that's the advertisement for the tourist department of Wallace, Idaho. Go visit the center of the universe. I love it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the, over over a decade at least in the Idaho governor's office, and all the great your work doing with the businesses over in Boise Metro. We can see it and we appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, until next time.